Welcome to Conversations from the Edge of Consciousness. I'm your host, Christine Madera. For me, and possibly for you, the inner world of consciousness has always been much more real and way more fun than the so-called real material world. Growing up, I thought I was alone in this, but I'm not. There are a lot of us, and far too many have no one to talk to who shares this experience. I've been lucky to cultivate a community of friends who love to talk about the energies, ideas, and vibrations that are pushing the edges of our own consciousness, as well as our collective consciousness. In Conversations from the Edge, we share our conversations with you. Welcome to Conversations from the Edge. This is your host, Christine Madera, and I'm very excited today to be here with Dr. Jenn Phoenix Hatfield. And so welcome, Dr. Jenn. So glad to have you here.
Good to be here.
So is there anything in particular you would like people to know about you today? I know you'd like to say something a little bit different each time.
I do. I didn't stop, and it's so funny because I do this every time we get on here, and I know as you start talking that this question comes, and I'm like, you'd think at some point I would stop and really plan beforehand. But then, you know what? When I follow my intuition, that works out well as well. So I'm going to check in with my intuition. And I would say that the way I'm going to introduce myself today is I am someone who is confident in my ability to respond, to adapt. I'm getting better at being versatile and flexible with the changes that are happening around us. And I am helping people to reconnect to their center and their equilibrium during these times of change.
Terrific. And that actually, speaks to where we wanted to start today, because there is so much change and so much of it requires us to either fall back on our skill sets that are not necessarily the skill sets that we generally lead with, or to develop new skill sets as far as being adaptable and focusing on other aspects of our life than we normally do. So we had talked a little bit about this prior to getting on, and I know you had been really highlighting a few of the skill sets that you thought were really important for you during this time. So let's just, jump into those and talk about how different kinds of skills that we've both been cultivating can be helpful right now when we're in so many different kinds of unknowns all at the same time.
Wonderful. Yes. Well, what I realized was, as this has continued to unfold, I was asking myself, why am I doing well? What is it that I'm doing that maybe others who are struggling is not a skill of theirs? And I realized that there were two things that stood out. And one is the relationship that I have created and built with myself and my body. And we talked about this in a previous podcast as far as body wisdom. And it's that ability to communicate with my body at any given moment, to see how I'm doing and to respond to the information that I receive. So even since all of this self-isolation has started, there have been times that I have not felt well. And yet I knew I had that ability. I asked questions, I received answers, and then I followed through on those answers. So that's one skill. The other skill is the relationship that I've established with my intuition, and that I trust it. Because again, I use that skill when it comes to making purchases, like going out in the community. I know for myself, my shopping habits have changed dramatically. I used to think nothing of going to the store on a daily basis if needed for things that I needed or wanted. And now I'm going to the store about every 2 weeks, sometimes a little less, sometimes a little bit more, as far as the few shopping trips that we have done. And how I decide is based on using my intuition. Is it in my highest and best interest to go shopping today? Is it my highest and best interest to go shopping at these particular store or stores? And I'm confident in the information that I receive that the choice that I make is in fact my highest and best interest, and as a result, also the highest and best interest of anyone I might come in contact with. And it's those two things that have allowed me and supported me to be less stressed, feel less overwhelmed, and not find myself in a state of anxiety when I am going out in the community, like I'm seeing some other people experience.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of that as well. And those two things are things that I work on at the same time. So I wanted to ask you, for you, what is the distinction between your intuition and listening to your body? Or do they have a crossover?
I would say they have a crossover, and that there is a difference, because while my intuition can speak to me through my body, I would say when my body's speaking to me or I'm asking questions of my body, it's more personal to me. It's
Okay.
more, how am I doing in the moment? How can I support my physical, emotional, spiritual, and mental self as an individual? And my intuition is more global or universal, that yes, how I receive some of that information might come through my body, but I would say it covers more area.
Okay. Well, that makes perfect sense, and I like the distinction you have there, because that makes a lot of sense to me, and I had not really sat down to think about the difference between those two, because there is a lot of crossover with those. So I know for a lot of people, well, we have this tendency, and this is a human tendency. This is not like a character flaw, but this is the way that we've all been trained to ignore the body, like rule the body with the mind, and rule the larger global wisdom that's available to us through intuition, through heart opening, that kind of thing, with our rational thinking. And so basically it's to live from the mind, from rational thought, from this wonderful brain that we have, but that the brain in a very limited way. So for people for whom body wisdom and intuition are something that are not yet skill sets, I know for me, I heard, and this could be used for either the body or the intuition. I had this really good suggestion from somebody that I had tried about one way to cultivate this. So he had said to sit with something that you like, sit with two alternatives that you're thinking about, like going to the store, not going to the store, whatever, and to not, you don't think about them. And you don't look for an instant yes or no on something, because oftentimes I know for me, like I can make my instant yes or no do whatever I want it to do, but to sit with that, like to go forward with that through like imagining yourself there or imagining yourself home for about 30 to 40 seconds. And in those 30 to 40 seconds, to notice how you feel about that, without actually thinking about it, but to just kind of like imagining yourself in the process of what it was that you were wanting to do, and notice how your body is really responding to that, because one will usually have more of an invitation than the other. And I found that I played with it for some things just to see if that was workable, and it really did have a lot of value to me. So that was one that I wanted to throw out as a suggestion for people, that if this is new, that might be a way to play with that. But what are some ways that you would suggest that people could begin to cultivate these skill sets?
Well, I like the example that you gave, and what that highlights for me is to give yourself the space to receive the answer.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to be a animal that asks a question and wants an immediate response. And that immediate response is often what we look to our mind for the answer.
Yes.
And one of the things that you shared in taking that 30 to 40 seconds is basically stepping back to view that answer, to receive that answer, not just from your mind, and see what your body as a whole is sharing with you. And it's that space that a more complete or whole answer, and I would say the answer I'm going to trust, is going to come from, versus just going to the mind and saying, oh, yes or no, or do this or don't do that. So to me, that space is really important. And like you said, it can be something as short as 30 to 40 seconds. I use a practice that's similar as far as showing people, and that's like what I call a body scan.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I recommend that people do the body scan even without having a question, but to just start and, if they're sitting quietly, eyes closed, starting at the top of their head and working their way down to their toes, what do they notice? What are they observing? Whether it's thoughts, whether it's emotions, colors, sounds, tension, an absence versus something feeling like it's there. There's a lot of different ways to describe it, but it's to get in that practice of just observing and noticing what's there or not there. And I would say that's an excellent way to start to develop these skills, whether it's for your intuition or for communicating with your body, that body wisdom. That works great for both of those things, because there's no right or wrong answer. You're not there to look for something specific or something in particular. It's just to notice what you notice. And the longer that someone practices this and engages in an activity like this, the more in tune they become with hearing, seeing, feeling, fill in the word, what your body has to share with you, and you being able to recognize it. And in doing that, when you start asking specific questions, then your body's communicating with you.
Yes. And so I've got two other skill sets that I've been working on as well that actually speak to this, similar processes with this. One of them goes along with your body scans. So a lot of what's happening in now and in the world and things, especially if you pay too much attention to it, or if your life's been disrupted and you've got a lot going on, like your kids are home and you're trying to sort your money stuff out and get to the store, or you've got parents you're taking care of, whatever. If you've got a lot of busyness in your life with this, and in busyness in a different way, oftentimes your body can be kind of a little bit hyper and anxious and that kind of thing. So one of the skill sets that I've been doing is I just call it like softening. And so as I scan my body, or I notice things going on in my body, I'll notice it, I'll kind of sit with it, and then I'll just soften whatever it is. So if it's muscle tension, I soften the muscle tension. If it's like an emotional response, like anxiety or something, it's almost either like taking a step back from it, or just softening around it and allowing that then, instead of feeling constricted and confined in that space, it allows it space. And for me, when I allow something that space, anything that is fear related, so anxiety, fear, depression, all those kinds of things, sadness, that when I create space for that and I step back and I soften, it allows it to kind of resolve itself in my body and release out. And I don't have to think about it, because if you try to think about it, I've known this for years, and I've worked with people with this for years, that when you overthink something, like trying to figure out why you're anxious, there's no real reason that you need to be anxious. Anxiety is present in anything that's in your field that is creating that same feeling, you don't have to get to the bottom of it. You just simply need to release it. And then you allow yourself to come into a deeper state of presence with yourself, and allows you to make better decisions when you can release that kind of stuff. So I found I've been using that with muscle tension. I've been using it with emotional stuff that comes up. I've been using it with thoughts. So when my mind gets a little too busy, I just soften around the thoughts. And then anything beneath those thoughts, any emotion beneath those thoughts, energy beneath those thoughts can resolve itself, and I can come into a deeper state of peace. So I've been playing that way with that particular skill set, which has been fun and interesting. And then the second thing is that I've been really practicing what it means and how it feels to be in grace and to trust grace. And by grace, I mean that divine presence, the presence of your higher self, that larger than yourself energy, that is like your higher consciousness, that part of you that is not just physical but beyond physical, that is with you all of the time and walking with you through every situation in life, and not to make things turn out a particular way, and not trying to intend a particular outcome, but to trust that whatever is happening in my life. And some days have some stressful stuff going on, like this morning and yesterday, I had some stressful stuff happening. And, I would find myself getting pulled in toward anxiety, and like, okay, stop. I don't need to go there. If I lean back into grace, I know that I'm always, this presence is walking with me through my life, and things may not be perfect. Things may not be turning out the way that I hope that they turn out, but I'm also not alone in this. And cultivating that knowing and that practice and the habit of just kind of leaning back into grace. So softening around the emotion and then leaning back into grace, or leaning into grace, so that I don't feel alone in this. And I understand that as I'm moving through this, I'm not moving through this by myself, that there's a larger presence and larger consciousness moving through this with me. Those have been skill sets for me that I've worked on more in the past, but not to this degree. And so it's been really interesting with this to have them fully, like, as part of my multiple times a day practice to move through whatever this giant unknown is that we're in. So I wanted to offer those two up as well, because I think they work well with the ones that you've been talking about.
Yes. And, we have, well, how do I put this? One of the things that I share with people is there are a lot of ways to support ourselves in this time, and a lot of tools available to us, and try some different ones. Try, in listening to us, we each offered a couple of different ways that we have worked through this, or work through this, because it's not over. It's something that's going to continue to unfold. And, if one resonates, try that first if you're looking for something new. And don't try all four of them.
No.
Which one stood out? Which one stood out? Which one seemed to call you? And start with that one. Because I think that's one of the other things that I've seen during this time is we've got to try to address it all, or we've got to try to do everything right, like the first time, right out of the gate, or like you've seen in some cases, I'm sure people have seen, I'm going to do this and this and this and this. Well, let's start. Our life in a lot of cases, for a lot of people, got turned upside down and changed drastically. And our body and beings are still responding to that, to then say, oh, okay, no, I'm good with this, and I'm just going to do all of these things all at the same time. What people are now finding is that's not really working. And
no, and can I make a comment on that one as well? Because that's another place we go back to the mind, is we figure if we have massaged our thought process to be okay with what's happening, like we assume that our body is on board. we assume that like our immune system is all working perfectly fine because we've decided in our thought process that, oh, we can do this, this will be great. But the body works on a different track, and the emotions work on a different track. And just because a thought process has decided everything is okay and has a plan doesn't mean everything is moving forward as a unit. And I think that's one of the big opportunities of this time, to really understand that we are a multi-dimensional system, and we've got lots and lots of parts that can work together or can work separately. And to go deeper beneath the mind feeling okay, to understand what it feels like for your body to feel okay, understand what it feels like for your emotional system to feel okay, to understand what it is to be like one in to really deeply nourish yourself from that place of moving forward, mind, body, and spirit together.
You're right. It is the mind. I mean, most of us, I won't say all, but most of us have this thing that we want to get it right. We want to get it perfect. Mm-hmm. We want to do the best that we can.
We want to have a plan because it makes us feel safe and in control.
And one of the ways that, yes, our mind tells us to do that is to do what we know. So it's to take what we've been doing, even though our circumstances are entirely different, it's to take what we've been doing and now just apply it to what's ahead of us. And again, that's not working.
No.
And part of the reason why I see that it's not working is to just say, okay, we're going to do, without taking care of the being. The being is, I would say, the true center. The being is where we can trust. It's been my experience and it's my belief that we can't like trust the mind, because the mind can literally change its mind from second to second, from moment to moment on the same topic. And that it's our body and it's our being that tells us what is true for us. And that's where we've got to take care of ourselves, because otherwise the mind is going to have us spinning. The mind is going to have us be on this roller coaster where we feel out of control. And I think it's that place that, in trying to create some semblance of control, we get into this practice of right and wrong. And it's the people who are doing things the right way, and of course the right way being what they've chosen for themselves, and that those who are not doing that are doing it the wrong way. And it doesn't leave any room or space to find common ground, to communicate. It comes from, in my opinion, this place of survival, this place of fight, flight, or freeze. And as long as we are making decisions and sharing information from that place, it's going to result in I'm right and you're wrong, versus being able to see other possibilities and perceptions, and how can we create or come up with a solution that is healthy for everyone involved.
Yes. And I think one thing that this virus has shown us is how little we are actually in control. Like, we've created systems that are deeply interconnected, where they work okay, not for everybody, but they work as systems in a reasonable way, as long as everything is working as it's supposed to, as it's under control. And when one little tiny thing, like a little teeny tiny virus, which is one of the smallest things possible on the planet, interferes with that, then everything is out of control, and it kind of blows this illusion open that we actually have control, which is really what brings me back to the grace piece for me, because I like everybody else, really like to be in control, and that's been an issue I've worked on for a long time. And in and this has really shown me how little control I have. And as we move forward into whatever's coming up next, that I think we're still going to maintain this kind of level of uncertainty for an extended period of time. And all of these skills we've talked about are skills that help us navigate uncertainty. And so for me, the one with grace helps to remind me, and this is why I love the grace piece. It reminds me that I don't need to be in control, that there is a larger force that's kind of has an eye on the whole thing that's guiding me forward. And so for me, grace encompasses the body wisdom, and encompasses intuition, and encompasses, relaxation into what's happening. And just that trust in knowing that there's something larger that has motion and flow in it, that I don't have to know everything that's going on. If I can trust grace, trust intuition, trust body wisdom, if I can come into those places where I can begin to trust that larger sphere of information and flow, than what I can see with my own eyes and control in my own sphere. And I think it's great practice, however you choose to do it, through intuition or body wisdom or whatever, to begin to feel more comfortable in uncertainty, because uncertainty is, I think, going to be the norm going forward for an extended period of time.
Yes, I agree. Well, to use Brene Brown, I know in one of her books, I can't remember which one because I love them all, she talks about normalizing discomfort.
Yeah.
That one of the reasons we have the issues that we do in our society today is in trying to control things, trying to make a right and wrong, because that is the clearest way to try to control things. What we've done is we've tried to keep things the same. Mm-hmm. And then when things are not the same, they become uncomfortable, and our body typically responds in fight or flight in a sympathetic way, that we find ourselves in survival mode. And as a result, we're holding on to what we believe even stronger, and get really upset at others who think differently. When I don't know about you, if I'm connected to my body wisdom, my intuition, or as you refer to it as grace, it's my feeling that when I am connected at that level, that what I'm doing is not only in what's the best interest for me, but in the best interest of those I'm coming in contact with, and those I'm interacting with, because it's coming from this place of higher wisdom. It's coming from a place of innate intelligence, and I would say like a universal wisdom, versus coming from our mind, which is a fraction. It's like 10% of what our mind is capable of doing is our logical or conscious mind. It's such a small piece.
Yeah. And one of the other things I love about Brene Brown, and I think I've talked about this briefly in other podcasts, but it's so worth saying again, and especially right now, because we are in this, this time where everything that we have come to expect no longer really works. And so one of Brene Brown's great tools is the idea, like, the story that I'm telling about this is, or the story that I'm making up about this is. And when you can kind of step back from the immediacy of the moment for a little bit, and even if some of these other tools are hard to grasp in the moment, if you can take a step back as things are happening, and tell yourself, like, the story that I'm making up about this is, the story that I'm making up about how I think things should work or be is. And when you can, like, put it out there, it's almost like putting it out on a chalkboard or a whiteboard or something. It makes it a little bit easier to say, okay, that's a story. That's not necessarily true. And when you can see that, it makes it easier then to be able to open to that larger truth. And even just ask your body, your intuition, your higher self what it is, just please help me understand a higher level of truth of what's happening here. And all of these things are really ways to begin to open up to a higher story and a broader perspective than what we are telling ourselves should be happening. And oftentimes, like, I think a lot of us are still in the denial stage, in the denial stage of grief or whatever, shock and that kind of stuff is, this is not happening. What is happening is this. And I'm just going to not participate in what it seems like is happening. And I'm going to continue to participate in the story as I see it. And we might be in that for a little bit while longer, as we're sort of clinging to how do we go back in time and recreate what we've had in the past. But being able to acknowledge the story that you're telling about a situation can help you to kind of to step away from it and open up to a larger understanding.
Yes, I would agree.
All right. So do you have any processes, thoughts, anything like that you would like to share, or beliefs or any kind of work you want to add to this?
I like to keep things simple. And I know I've shared this and we've discussed this in some other podcasts, but when my anxiety wants to come up, when my concern or stress wants to come up, especially with circumstances like we are living now, I'm going to go back to the belief I am safe. And I'm going to revisit that every day, as many times a day as need be. And I'm going to come from that place, because if I'm safe, then I can step out of my sympathetic or survival mode. I can step out of that fight, flight, freeze mode, because I don't want to make decisions from that place. Because when we're talking survival mode, we're talking survival in this immediate moment. We're not talking long-term survival.
I just want to throw this in here too, because oftentimes when we think of survival, we think of physical survival, but emotional survival is also a survival impulse. And when you're trying to emotionally survive the present moment, like, that can really cause some problems down the line too. So I just wanted to throw out the fact that emotional survival and physical survival run the same circuitry in the brain.
And so that's why I go back to I am safe. Because when we're talking about this virus and we're talking about the changes that we've already been living, for a lot of us, for 30 days or more, with, I know where we live, with an indefinite time frame on when the shelter at home or be safe at home ends. We don't have a deadline right now. It's until they give us word that it's done or it's going to end. And with that being the case, we're talking more long term. And I think for many, based on conversations and based on information that's being shared, it's my feeling that many people are operating in that sympathetic or fight, flight, freeze mode, that survival mode.
Yeah.
And at some point, that's going to lead to a decreased immune function. It's going to lead to illness. It's going to lead to, like, opportunistic, to use that word, illnesses, injuries that are going to come from because we're not taking care of ourselves. Not for our long-term health and well-being. To go back to answer your question, so I am safe is the belief that's going to be my foundational belief. I am my most powerful healer. I'm going to use the body scanning, and I'm going to continue to have a strong relationship with my intuition. Those are my core tools. Those are my core beliefs. I have ways that I can expand them and use them. I've got a list of 200 beliefs that I work with for myself and my clients.
Right.
Those two are the two I'm going to go back to.
Okay, so one way when I'm feeling unsafe that I can come back into the experience of feeling safe is to come into the present moment. Like, I might be emotionally feeling unsafe, but I'm like, okay, I'm sitting on my sun deck. The sun is out. The wind is breezy through here. Right now, I'm absolutely perfectly safe. Like there, and I come really into the physical. I can see my plants. I have my hot cup of tea. I've got, I can see the kids playing outside. I can see the trees over here. I can see the birds flying. And I come really into the present moment. And that reminds me, pulling into the present moment, that in that moment, I am safe physically and emotionally, mentally, and that kind of thing. So as far as like cultivating the belief or the experience of being safe and being your biggest healer, your most powerful healer, what are some of the ways that you actually do that as a practice, like to help people to be able to anchor into those things?
I do it either, well, I use it as a belief.
Mm-hmm.
I set it as an intention.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm feeling jittery or antsy with it, like I can't sit still, that meditation or just even sitting quietly for a minute to 5 minutes, like my body is going, no, that's not going to work for me to sit still. Then I'm going to use it as a mantra.
Mm-hmm.
As I'm walking around the house, walking outside, doing dishes, in the shower, and allow myself to get in a meditative state that way. The other that I recommend would be, whether you've done it or not before, go out and hug a tree and spend some time hugging a tree.
Mm-hmm. Yes, trees are our friends.
Yes, they are. And they have so much to offer us. So again, I like to keep it simple, and I like to use things that are always available to us. And typically we can find nature. And if you can't, for some reason, even stepping out in the sun and feeling the sun.
Yeah.
Will,
Or being with a pet or a house plant.
right.
I mean,
Yes.
any kind of, like, that's
Yes.
nature too. If you've got
Yes.
like an aloe plant here, that's
And
nature.
of course, I prefer to actually be able to touch it, but if you can't, visualizing it. Like, where do you like to be in nature? Now I know I have some people who they'll take nature however they can get it. The more they're in it, getting dirty and like their hands in the dirt and their feet on the dirt, they are really happy. And I know other people, it's like they don't want to actually touch nature. And so visualizing it or experiencing it in a way that feels good for you. I go back to those. Again, we can have a huge tool bag, but if we don't remember to use them, or we don't know which one to use, especially when we're in fight, flight, freeze, then I go back to keeping it simple, having a few core tools that you can use at any time. And because you're practicing it regularly, when you really do need it, they're available for you.
All right. So can you tell people how they can connect with you?
Yes. My website is theintuitivephoenix.com. And I would say, based on some of the things that we talked about today, from my website, checking out my YouTube channel, because I've got lots of videos that share more of the other tools that I share with others, that I sometimes use for myself, and certainly talk about topics like this, and that would support this.
All right. Well, thank you very much for our conversation today. I'll be talking with you again soon, especially since we all can't leave the house. There's plenty of time to talk.
Right.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is your host, Christine Madera. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation from the edge of consciousness. You can find all our conversations at conversationsfromtheedge.net. You'll also find links to schedule a private conversation with me or any of my friends, as well as tools to help you expand your own consciousness and explore what's possible for you outside the boundaries of your current perceptions. Feel free to use this podcast to start your own conversation by sharing it with friends, on social media, in your blog, or even in your own podcast. And as always, live the adventure of pushing your own edge. It's the most amazing adventure there is.